Very pleased to be here with you and have the chance to share some thoughts on high nature value and its links with biodiversity. And I would like to first say that I actually think the single concept of high nature value is quite fascinating because it's indeed what enshrines what is EU's nature to a large extent, because as we all know, we are here for some centuries, even millennia, interfering with nature, bringing in agriculture. So what Europeans have in their mind, in my view, of what farming means is pretty much high nature value farming. What I think Europeans like in the rural landscape is exactly this mix of trees, hedgerows, little fields, a variety of natural and semi-natural vegetation with quite some animals around, rather than very extensive fields full of mechanization where the last tree was taken out to give some further meters for production. So this enshrines pretty much what Europeans consider are the public goods that agriculture does deliver. And we do know there are some challenges around, so it's very good to see these projects like HNV-Link to find not only the difficulties but also the solutions, the commonalities that HNV can have. But what I wanted to focus on is then on biodiversity and what HNV can mean for biodiversity. And for that, yes, I will refer to the EU's biodiversity strategy, but let me give you some words first on the global context of biodiversity, because there we don't have good news, in the sense that, you know, the more we look at it, and all reports show, if you want a summary of what has been happening in the world while humans expand, well, we so slowly degrade land and ocean, or if you want, the biosphere. So in a way, our development, which has brought many good things for us, had the side effect of undermining step by step the life support systems of the planet. And we now know on the discussion on sustainability that the old approach of 3 pillars is a bit outdated. Because yes, there are 3, but they are not pillars, they are layers. There's a hierarchy between the layers. And the only candidate for the underlying layer is the environment or the biosphere or nature, what you want to call it, upon which a society can be built and an economy can be built. Wherever you look into sustainability, what are the 2 single SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, that drag behind in success? 14 and 15, life on water, life on land. So bad news for biodiversity. But the world is reacting. I've just been in past December, November, December in Egypt, where there was the summit of the Convention on Biological Diversity, paving the process towards what needs to be a new deal for nature to be reached in 2020 in Beijing in the next COP. So the perception that we will not achieve the overall goal of halting biodiversity loss is well ingrained. There are some success stories there, just offset by the continuing business as usual, where slice by slice we degrade nature. So we do have in the EU a EU biodiversity strategy that follows the global framework of today, which aims to halt biodiversity loss, and we are not on track to reach 2020 within the EU and having halted biodiversity loss. We know that, including from reports of the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services that has shown also for Europe. We are losing nature and its services. So the current biodiversity strategy does have as one of its objectives to increase the contribution of agriculture to biodiversity conservation, with associated targets to maximize those areas, those agricultural areas that have measures targeted for biodiversity. And in this, high nature value farming is essential if we want to meet this target and to improve the conservation status of species and habitats. And in fact, when we look at it, it's in high nature value areas that some of the most important biodiversity in Europe exists. Yes, there are semi-natural elements of a high nature value, which are valuable in themselves, and there are also less natural areas that nevertheless are important as a refuge for a significant number of species. So these high nature value farming helps protect biodiversity on the farmland itself, but also in the wild, from this element of interaction with the wild around. And of course, it's also in high nature value areas that you find genetic resources for agriculture that are such as crop types highly adapted to local conditions or livestock breeds. You know, this concept of agricultural biodiversity, I've noticed, for instance, the Food and Agriculture Organization is now looking further not only to this genetic diversity element, but also to the functional biodiversity element of keeping a thriving ecosystem. So the high nature value captures pretty much both these components. To give an example of what is nowadays, by the way, I did not say it, but within EU's biodiversity, farmland biodiversity is specifically declining. So there is a problem out there in the way we are managing the farmland today, and the most evident part of it, or an element that everyone notices and understands, is the decline of pollinators, which has been pretty sharp. That's why we have adopted an EU initiative on pollinators. To reverse it was adopted in June 2018, and it's actually in a high nature value farming that there are many essential habitats for pollinators. So this trend towards protecting pollinators and insects overall also brings in some new attention to high nature value. Now, I've heard, and it's true, that there's a lot of high nature value within Natura 2000, the protected sites that emanate from the Habitats Directive, and outside of it also. But for sure, if we are to fulfill our obligations under the Birds and Habitats Directives, the two flagships of EU nature conservation policy, we need to do it through high nature value farming. Many natural habitats are within high nature value farming, habitats protected by directive. To give a couple of examples, the semi-dry calcareous grasslands, or those Iberian habitats, the Hezas in Spain, Montados in Portugal. In any case, they are also nowadays, these species and habitats, in several cases, in the most unfavorable conservation status, which matches this diagnosis that high nature value farming has been declining itself and facing several difficulties. On this project, there's something I would like to say. First, I'm impressed of having this lot of ideas coming and these 10 learning areas. I'm also interested on the similarity of the problems in spite of the differences on such areas, and also on knowing these possible solutions. But here let me bring you one thought on innovation. I was inspired by some words I've listened right now in these past presentations. For instance, innovation may be based on new, but also on traditional practices. So a traditional practice can actually be revived or retouched as innovation. It may be technological, non-technological, or social. So let me give you a couple of examples. Europe's nature is also changing in itself. We have, for instance, in many places an expansion of large carnivores, such as the wolf, which brings quite some contentious difficulties, noticeably with livestock breeders, and not least in France, for where we are now. Of course, large carnivores were there in the past, and we don't want to go back to the Middle Ages for sure, but there are certainly some preventive measures of the past that can be revived by one side, and certainly we could also try to bring new technological innovations to allow to deal with that difficulty so as to protect our herds and allow then the carnivores to fulfill the ecological role that they had lost in the past. We had in the same time, we have today an excess of ungulates in some places. So if we would achieve well-protected herds, everyone would be better served. My second example comes from precision farming. Many people equate precision farming as a further effort to intensify agriculture. That's not the way I see it. It's just technological solutions for whatever better solution. So I do think that precision farming can likely be applied, for instance, also to agroecology. if the drone would bring in the beneficial insect, or a robot will take out mechanically the weed, isn't this a contribution? So I think high nature value farming can probably also benefit of technological approaches, provided we can get the funding support, the adequate funding support. Now, one further comment on data, let's say. Yeah, 5 minutes, so I will accelerate a bit. First, one point that I want to refer, and this project is important for that also, is we have a lack of data on high nature value. We have some rough estimates of how much there is, between some 20 to 30% of agricultural land can classify as high nature value. We have rough estimates also indicating that the Natura 2000 area covers some 30% of the area of high nature value farming, but we know these data are not enough. So just to signal to you that the Commission is supporting a project that we call European Monitoring of Biodiversity in Agricultural Landscapes, EMBAL, which is for the systematic collection of biodiversity field data, and the work on HNV and related indicators will be important. Now maybe my final point is on financing. Of course, my colleague Mihail Dumitru will speak to you on the CAP later on, but first it's well identified that one of the challenges for high nature value farming, as for nature conservation, is insufficient funding. We have done an evaluation of the nature directives that has signaled exactly that. A lot of this comes from the CAP, from rural development, noticeably. And a good link we can do on the funding needs comes from this instrument that the Habitats Directives instructs the member states to do. We call them the prioritized action frameworks, which is the set of needs and measures that should be funded for nature. And a good planning of the paths together with rural development programs will be key to do better on this. Now, others also said high nature value goes well beyond Natura 2000, but at least for Natura 2000 we have the solid grounds from the Habitats Directive and this need for co-funding where we should achieve a more effective integration between biodiversity and the CAP. And for this I will not say myself what the next CAP will bring, you'll hear more about that. But I would say, first, it's very good to see that one specific objective of the CAP for the next, in the Commission's proposal is biodiversity. And I would signal two crucial issues in my view to make better. One is, if the CAP is to deliver for the environment and the climate, is purely normal and coherent that those contributions should be aligned with environmental and climate regulations, plans and tools. That's foreseen in the proposal, and it's not the status quo nowadays. And the second fundamental element is from good articulation between administrations. I followed the administrations of my own member state in the past, and I've seen how often there's no contact, no cooperation, no real articulation. So on involving environmental authorities in dialogue with agricultural authorities to shape the CAP strategic plans in their environmental dimensions, that will make a hell of a difference. And you'll see also new instruments coming like eco schemes in Pillar 1, pure EU funds that many can be actually designed specifically to support high nature value. If I have 1 minute, I have one final thought, which is more, let's say, on the meta-politics of all this, because by one side, yes, we want to protect nature, biodiversity, farmers, but I think high nature value farming has more to deliver to the political landscape than meets the eye. Because if I'm right, that most Europeans, what they cherish is a rural landscape, matches high nature value farming and what it provides. And if we are having more and more Europeans living in cities, so a bit more detached from the reality of agriculture, but also questioning what should we finance in the context of less resources and more needs, then it's better that we can design EU funds in such a way as to support high nature value farming. Because if we don't this support, this much needed support for the CAP will be more and more questioned. So I think we should actually, we achieve a lot for agriculture and for nature if we succeed, and I'm pretty confident that we'll have the tools for that. Thank you.